blame this on you, Ron?
Sure, why not? Let me change my name first.
Welcome in, everybody. It's 50 Toasts with Costaki. This is a format that that's been an excuse for me to talk to a friend once a week or so over the pandemic and connect and share and interact with fans and people out there and buddies and whatever. And this week we got a totally weirdo one. My friend Ron here said to me, I bet people would love to ask you questions. Why don't you be a guest sometime? And I thought, well, that's preposterously self-indulgent. But yeah, I'm open to that. Why not? I'm an open book. Well, let's do that. So I grabbed the two. I've got some Patreon people. These are a couple of my big Patreon guys. In fact, you guys are the two. Patreon has tiers. You guys are the two top tier guys. You're the Cat's Ass members. And so I thought, I know and like guys. That's right. I know and like both of you guys. Why don't we have them on? We'll have sort of a collegial conversation, and I'll answer questions, and it'll be like I'm the guest. And so that's what we're doing. Let's do a couple housekeeping things, and then we'll just kick it off and see where we go. Quick Snaps to podcast we're still doing in the off season. Aaron and I are sort of flirting around with how often to do it. It'll probably be every other week-ish. And we'll probably be like, come in and definitely do a podcast, whatever. Once Deshaun Watson gets traded, there'll be some big movements here in the next month or so with free agency. And then, of course, the draft is not that far away, and the NFL does a good job of keeping a year-round schedule of things that are happening. So we'll stay connected, and we'll keep doing that. And when we do it, it's Mondays at 7:30. If you want to jump in, again, you can ask questions and do whatever. If you guys are watching right now and you want to ask me a question, jump right in here. Throw it in the comments. We'll get to it. 50 Toasts we do in this spot, 9 p.m. every Tuesday night. I just confirmed my guest for next week. We'll get back to the regular format. It'll be me chatting and asking questions of Greg Stone, who is a great radio friend of mine. He might be known to some of you guys out there in the radio listening universe as Uncle Nasty. Then he grew into Nasty, and he sometimes goes by Stone. He sometimes goes by Stony, and sometimes he goes by Greg, and we'll unravel all of that. He's the only radio guy to ever offer me a real job. For a half a second, I contemplated moving to Denver to be a radio guy. I love Greg Stone, and he's a character, and you will love him too. We'll talk to him next week. Go to patreon.com, type in Costaki, and figure out how you can join in and connect, and maybe even come on a show and ask you questions someday. Come join us at All Pro Lines. It's a great place for goofing around and doing football jokes, and we're still going to do that all in the off season. We turned it down to a simmer from a roiling boil, but we are still doing it. And without further ado, let's dive in. These two great guys, Brian Schultz, John Riggs, great supporters of mine, of the podcast. Riggsy was an early adopter of the Patreon thing. And of course, Ron over here has been super supportive all the way through. He even does a bunch of the anything that's remotely challenging to do graphically for All Pro Lines. I said it to Ron. I go, hey, can you figure? I don't know what I'm doing. You figure this out. These guys have been great and doing this. I really appreciate you guys being here. A round of applause for Ron Schultz and John Riggs from me. All right.
Well, thank you.
I got some beer. I got some time. I'm an open book. Let's talk. What do you guys want to know? You guys are the voice of the people out there. Let's discuss.
Well, first, I want to say thank you for what you do and all the comedians out there. I mean, especially in a year like we just had and we're still having, to have people like you that can give us some joy, some moments where we can laugh, smile, take our mind off things. It's very important. I think it's important work you do. So thank you for that. Thank you for All Pro Lines. Thank you for all you do on Bob and Tom, everything. I mean, it's been great, and appreciate you and everybody like you.
Thanks, man. That's very kind. Appreciate it, Ron.
Oh, absolutely.
So I guess we should probably start the way you usually start your. A lot of times you start your act is with your name, Costaki Economopoulos. I mean, you get a lot of looks, a lot of comments on that. A lot of mispronunciations, misspellings on posters and things.
That's right.
Did you ever think about changing it? I mean, before when you first started, did anyone tell you needed to make it shorter, or how did that all work out for you?
It's funny. I would say twice a month for 20 years, people told me to change my name for show business.
Yeah,
Somebody somewhere, some club owner, some radio dude, some friend of mine. And I just resisted. It just part of the goal of being a comic is to reveal yourself on stage. It just seems weird to begin that process by using a fake name. So
right.
it is true that it's a pain in the ass and it's hard for people to remember. But who cares? We're all grown ups and it's part of my story. And I always loved the name. And once you get it, it's kind of fun to say. And it's fun. It's fun. So many years I've been arriving at comedy clubs, and the woman who works the phone is like, "I've been trying to say your name for 17 days in a row. Come here, you bastard!" And they give me a hard time. I always loved that. I loved all that stuff, so I just embraced it and stayed with it.
So you think it's an advantage too, though? I mean, it's almost gimmicky in a sense. I mean,
Yeah, that's interesting.
no one else has it.
I've never really embraced it. I don't do a lot of Greek material. My buddies used to give me a hard time, and they said I should powder my face white and wear a toga and like a ring of olive leaves and just like embrace it as a shtick. And I'm like, nah, I'm not doing that. Yeah, maybe. My friend Tom Simmons and I started together and have been we're kind of like twins in comedy in some ways. And he has the opposite problem where his name is weirdly forgettable, right?
Right.
It fits on the sign, but it doesn't stand out. So I don't know. We probably both should change our names to something that's catchy but short.
Nah, stick with it. I think it works.
I've always thought that. The only time I ever didn't use my real name is in my early days of stand-up. One of my day jobs was I worked for a guy that booked comedy nights in non-stand-up venues. So I was calling Holiday Inn food and beverage managers in Valdosta, Georgia, and Asheville, North Carolina, and every possible tiny little speck of a town around the Southeast. And I was pitching a thing that most of them had never heard of. And so for that job, my name was Chris Poulos.
Chris Poulos.
Because my middle name is Christo. So I thought, okay, that's not a lie. And Poulos is just short. And so, okay, it's not technically a lie. It's just short. And so I was fine with that. I just didn't want to tackle the whole thing in the middle of a sales conversation.
Did anyone ever expect when you first opened your mouth on stage then that you would have a foreign accent?
You know what? There was a guy who was big in the 80s who had a German name and would open with the German thing and do this almost Nazi soldier character for like 5 minutes. And then he would just break out of it and go, "Yeah, I know. I don't have that accent. I was just fucking around." And I was kind of enjoyed that because it was such a weird choice. But again, you can only do that once and it seems fake, right?
Right.
I don't know. It wasn't my cup of tea, but I liked it as a consumer for him. I thought it was funny.
Yeah. John, I'm leaving up to you now. What do you got?
I'm just going to go ask.
What's that?
I'm just going to ask pretty much a generic question. Is there a particular comedian that made you want to get into comedy, or did you just say, "I'm kind of a funny guy, I can go do stand up," or how did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, initially I wasn't a particularly funny guy. I wasn't really a class clown. I found this recently. I had like a spiral notebook where I would write street jokes into it because I was so terrible at remembering jokes. And then I had, whatever, 20 or so that I kind of knew that I could tell once in a while. So in that regard, there was some sign of interest in being funny, but I wasn't really a funny guy and like hanging out with friends. In fact, I was more the guy that would say something and kind of throw it away. So if nobody noticed, it would just go away and that would be fine. I was definitely not the class clown type. But class clown's a good segue to my original superhero. It was always George Carlin. And so, I mean, when I was, you guys are, we're all men of roughly the same age. I would I had cassette tapes. That was I had a wall of cassette tapes, and about half of them were comics. I had probably, I don't know, 11 or 12 different George Carlin albums, and I had Bobcat Goldthwait and Sam Kinison and Howie Mandel, and I just loved all those guys. Oh, look at you. Yeah. Yeah, I had Noah was one of the first records that was in my house when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably, is that true for you guys too?
Yeah. I mean, I would sit there by the record player with the headphones on and just play the albums over and over and over again. And we've talked about this. Comedy, sometimes the way it's written, it's almost like it's a song. I mean, you want to hear the same thing over and over again. And even look at people going to shows in these big arenas and such to see Jim Gaffigan because they want to hear him say Hot Pockets, I mean,
Yeah.
But he's got to say it exactly the way he said it on the album or how he said it, and it's, yeah. And that's what we expected from Bill Cosby, from George Carlin. And if you went to every show of his, you'd see that it was so consistent and it was so spot on, perfect. I mean, and he put a lot of work into that.
Oh my goodness. So much work.
He put so much work into it. So yeah, constructing a joke and getting it refined to that moment where it's almost like writing a song and it's exactly perfect and it goes on the album that way and then you perform it that way and people expect you to perform it that way. It's interesting.
And they expect you to bring new stuff too, right? And
that too.
Right.
And they don't walk out to the bathroom when you say, I'm going to do some new stuff now. Right?
Well, I'm going to be doing a bunch of new stuff at some point. I did so much writing to get ready for this Nowhere comedy show that I did online. So
yeah,
I'm going to have to balance this sort of how much new stuff versus the old stuff. And I'm going to try, I might fail, but I'm going to try to treat it like some of these big shots do, where it's like they recorded the album and that's out.
Yeah.
And it's time to build the hour,
Sure.
So that's my goal. We'll see. So who are your favorite comics when you guys first started watching comedy?
Me? Yeah, I would say, Bill Cosby. I mean, I watched the Ed Sullivan Show. I'm that old. So, we'd see, Stiller Mira and Toady Fields and Marty Allen. And, I kind of grew up thinking these guys are kind of fun.
Right.
They stay on stage. I get up on stage, tell stories, and the stories aren't necessarily true. They're a little larger than life, but it's a really interesting career. And I've always been a fan of comedy. I mean, as I got older, I appreciated Steve Martin and Woody Allen. He's got some great stuff. The Moose Story is awesome.
The Moose Story is one of the best bits. If anyone's watching this and doesn't know the Moose bit from Woody Allen, for the love of God, do yourself a favor and go find it. I actually teared up one night listening to it. It's so beautifully done.
Indeed.
It's fantastical and insane and gorgeous and layered and word economy and beautiful imagery and hilarious. That's one of the great bits of all time.
And Mel Brooks, Carl Reiner, and the Smothers Brothers. I mean, just some great stuff back there. But now we've got some great comedians today. I mean, Brian Regan and Emo. I love Emo. Emo's a product of the 80s, but still, he's still around and he's still doing well. And
he's great.
And you performed with him recently, so.
Yeah, I got to work with him last year. It was a great honor of mine. He was one of my early heroes. When I was in college, we went to see Emo at the University of Georgia when I was a freshman, and we got the poster, we put it on the wall in the dorm room, and we quoted Emo lines back and forth all year long. We just thought he was great. He had some, I won't do it justice, but just to give you some idea, I still remember this line because I was walking down the street. Terrible impression. You get the idea. I'm walking down the street. A rock shoots out of a lawnmower and comes within 3 inches of my right eye and hit me in the left eye. There were like 10 of those, and we would quote it to each other all the time. Cut to many years later. I got to, I got to work with him in Scotland, of all places. He came to see our show. I went to see his show on the same night, totally randomly, without knowing each other's moves. And we ended up having beers and talking about life in a pub in Scotland for hours. And then I've seen him about once a year since. There's always some weird thing. I went and had Thai food at his house one day, and he invited me to go to Vegas with him. I love Emo. He's one of my heroes, and exactly what you want him to be.
Yeah.
Weird and brilliant and gentle and kind. He's sometimes you meet your heroes and you're disappointed. He's exactly what you want.
Even off stage, though. I mean, even as his alter ego, right?
Yeah, he's not that weird as his onstage persona, but he's pretty weird.
Is he?
Yeah, he's
I was gonna ask
very.
you, though, about that character-driven type of comedians, like the Bobcat Goldthwait, and the ones that develop these personas, that style.
The one that sticks with me,
Haywood Banks.
Yeah, that's right. Some guys make really strong choices, and some of them are subtle, like Gaffigan and Attell and Hedberg. They've got a cadence and a style that separates them, but it's not a character, right? It's more of there's a beauty and a simplicity and a brand that's on stage. But a character, like, to me, the middle ground is someone like Lewis Black, who is so gentle and reminds me of my dad, in real life. And on stage, he's just embraced and exaggerated. There's like an angry slice of him. And so he just exaggerated that to be sort of his onstage persona.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always been a great lesson to me. Like I still feel sometimes like I'm looking for that, where it's organic and it's real because it's true to him, but it is a little bit cartoonish. And it sets him apart from the pile, and it gives his words a little more oomph because they fit into it's almost a character. It's certainly an exaggerated slice of his personality.
Sure.
What about you, Riggsy? Who'd you watch growing up?
Oh, I kind of like Ron was saying. I grew up and we had the George Carlin albums. I'm the youngest of 7, so had a lot of yeah. So Alan Sherman albums I remember in the house, Cheech and Chong, Steve Martin, I said already, George Carlin, stuff like that. So yeah.
Right. So I came a little bit later, where I was a big fan of Carlin and Cosby and those guys, but the one that was the monster when I was like in middle school and just beginning to wake into adulthood was Eddie Murphy. It was ever present everywhere you went. It was Eddie Murphy, the HBO special, the tapes, the thing. We were quoting those lines all around the neighborhood the whole time. I mean, he was the giant when I was first paying attention. And then, you grow up a little bit, you get a little more, like, there's so many great ones from that era. I mean, my era was sort of that ever-present 5-minute set on A&E's Improv everywhere you looked. There was the MTV half-hour comedy hour. All of those things were all over the place. So, I mean, there's so many of those guys that still stand. To me, Haywood stood out from that pile at the time. I loved his stuff. He had that whole thing about the signs.
I have a recording of him on A&E's Evening at the Improv from back then. Quite a different character from what he is now.
Right. But still weird and interesting and great writing.
Get your attention and brilliant in his comedy. I mean, it was fun.
Dennis Wolfberg stands out to me in that era.
Oh, yeah.
There were so many good ones. Ron Milford's chiming in. George Carlin, I have a few of those albums memorized. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Costaki,
right? You got to talk with Carlin once, right?
Yeah, one time we had a phone conversation. I had a weird thing where I drove up to New Hampshire, and I was in this tiny little town in the middle of nowhere, working a Radisson hotel bar comedy night thing. And as I pulled into town, it was like a one light town. The old theater in town said George Carlin 2 nights only, and it was the same 2 nights I was there. I was like, who the fuck's gonna come see me? And so I had this daydream that I was going to like I was going to be wandering around this town late at night and I was going to run into him and we were going to hang out. It was ridiculous. And this was well before cell phones. So what I did was I realized there were only 2 nice hotels, like within like a 50-mile radius of this place. So I just called them both and I asked to speak to George Carlin. And they both told me that he wasn't there. And then I sat there for a second I've at the time I'd been a comic for like 10 years and I knew there were so many stories about how great Carlin is to other comics. So I thought, all right, I'll call the hotels back and I'll just ask to leave a message and then he'll get the message and then he'll call me back. Again, ridiculous fantasy. So I call back one of the hotels and I go, I know you told me that George Carlin isn't there, but it occurs to me that you have to tell me that. But just in case he is there, can I leave him a message? And the guy goes, yeah, all right. Hold on. I'll put you. And I completely fell apart. This is a totally true story. And I just fumbled and meandered and I stammered and I was like, George, I just think it was awful. I just left the most ridiculous. You're the reason I'm a comic, and I just want to say thanks. And if there's any chance you want to have breakfast before you leave town, I would love to hang out with you. It was awful. I just left this terrible message. So I go to bed. Pretty early in the morning, the phone in the hotel I'm staying in rings, and nobody knows I'm there. Like my parents, they didn't call them and give them the number. Like there's no cell phone. So I sat up in bed and I swallowed really hard and I let it ring a second time. And I knew that it was George Carlin. And I pick up the phone and it was that voice that I'd been listening to for fucking 20 years. It was amazing. And he was complaining about being put on hold, calling into the hotel. And it was the same happy voice. And it was weird because when I left him a message, I was a mess. And when I was talking to him, it was like it was an old friend. He was just so easy to talk to. And he told me about his show where the sound was a little tinny, but he got to work on some jokes. And I told him about my show where the other comic didn't show up. So I had to do the whole thing by myself. And we just like talked shop for a few minutes. He goes, hey, I'm jumping on a plane. I got to get out of town. I got a show tonight. But if there's anything I could ever do for you, let me know. Thanks for the kind words. And it was a great talk. I got to say to him what I always wanted to say, which is, you, sir, are a master of your craft. Thank you for all the laughs. And he was super generous and very kind. And it was cool that I got to talk to him once,
Yeah. I saw him 3 different occasions after his shows and eye contact was there. I mean, it wasn't like he was trying to look past me, trying to look for his car, his ride, or somebody else, but he was talking to me, I mean, he asked who I was, what my name was. And
right.
He was very, very interested in his fans and very, very kind, like you said. Different than what you might imagine him from being on stage, obviously. But yeah, nice guy. So let's go back to that first time you went up on stage.
Ooh.
Where did you do that? And how long were you on stage? Was it a club? Was it a private event? And how much preparation went into that?
Oh, lots. I was terrified. The first time I ever was on stage was a Certs and Doritos. How's that for a weird branding pair? Were the sponsors of a college comedy competition in the early 90s. I want to say 91 or 92. And I was at the University of South Florida that year. And it's exactly what you think. I think it was 3 minutes and there were like 30 people that went up and most of us were terrible. And at the time I had seen, oh man, my brain froze. The Sniglets guy. What's his name?
Oh,
I know
you're good at this game, Ron.
I can
that's so weird that I can't remember his name. He's a great comic.
I can't think of it.
Oh, it's going to bug me. I'm going to look it up.
Hold on. Right in.
It would be ridiculous for me to not know this, so I'm going to look it up. Where is it? Come on.
Ron Milford said Rich Hall.
Rich Hall.
That's it. It's Rich Rich Hall. There's Ron Milford helping me out. Of course, it's Rich Hall. So Rich Hall was doing. He was making the round. He was a big time comic at the time. He made the rounds on the late night shows, and he did this thing with detergents where he told a story. He was like, "You can have it all, but you got to take some whisk," and it was this crazy thing. And he would throw the Tide out, and then the Tide would come back in. Someone in the audience would throw the box back to him, and he had this whole shtick that was with the thing. And I saw him do another one a different time with candy bars, where he had a story and he had the candy bars, and he would tell this crazy story. And I remember watching those and thinking, cereal boxes is where it's at. What are you doing, Rich Hall? That's where there's a lot of names that everyone knows and they're goofy and you can write a story. So I basically borrowed Rich Hall's premise and wrote all new cereal box jokes. I literally went to the store and wrote down every cereal I could think of and came home and wrote a story and then went back and I bought about 25 boxes of cereal. So my first time on stage was a story where the joke punchlines were cereal boxes in Rich Hall style in a college comedy competition. And I placed. I came in, third, maybe something. And they gave me, I don't know, $50 worth of coupons to Applebee's or something. I literally I won
for cereal or something.
Yeah. So I was very encouraged that it was not as impossible as I thought it might be. And it was, I wasn't good at it, but I was willing to work at it. And I was a better writer than probably a performer, which is probably still true. And so I just hung in there and kept working. I found it fascinating and I did it when I could. And I didn't do it for a whole year between the first and second time I did comedy. But after that, I got kind of the bug and I was like, oh, this is at least possible.
Froze up.
Are you back?
Hello? Hello?
Yeah, I think we're all back.
There you are.
Hello.
I'm here.
So short answer. It's not a short answer, but the first time I was ever on stage was the first two times, the Certs Doritos comedy competition, doing 3 or 4 minutes cereal box jokes.
But nobody pushed you. Nobody said you can do this.
Let me look at we got a couple of people. No, because it still seemed impossible, but I did feel like I was better at it than I thought I was going to be. And I thought, well, I could do it as a hobby. I could go play around with it. Yeah, I went to if you go to an open mic, there's usually some people on the show that are bad enough that makes it seem accessible. You know what I mean? Because you go, well, I could be terrible and I'm still allowed to be here, like, oh, okay. Well, then if I could be better than terrible, that would be good. And then you go and you try it and you're terrible and you try to be better than terrible. It's a very steep learning curve on stand-up comedy. At the beginning, it's really fucking hard. So you find a safe place that's okay to be terrible and you figure it out. All right, let me jump in and look at some of these questions. Costaki, my 8-year-old, just said, is that the Annapolis guy? Yes. Yes, he's the Annapolis guy. I'll take it. An 8-year-old. The new wave of fans knows me. Like that counts as knowing me, the Annapolis guy. Ron Milford's in here. Meredith, Falcons, Grant Collard. Tony Offer, what's up, man? Oh, you knew Rich Hall too? All right. It's my story. I can't even remember the characters in it.
Hey, Costaki, you may have mentioned this
All right,
earlier.
Ron, what else Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Go
Can you
ahead,
hear me? Oh, I was going to say, you may have answered this earlier with the emo, when you're talking about emo.
I got a giant lag.
Is there any comic you would you drop? Well, what comic would you drop everything to go see if you could, if he was in town?
Oh, yeah. Right now?
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, I haven't gone anywhere in a year, so right now it's hard to say.
Well,
but
pre-pandemic.
the spirit of your question is there are so many. There are so many great ones. I did grab some buddies who weren't hardcore comedy fans and insist that they come with me to see Ian Bagg.
Oh, okay.
One night in Richmond. He just happened to be playing the local club when I was down there. Friends. And Ian is one of the best comics in the English-speaking world. He is amazing and not really known yet, but man, he's good, especially a live show. He does a lot of crowd work, and he's really gut laugh funny. And so many of the names that we know, I've been lucky enough to work with and would happily go see if it was doable. I'm a big fan of Bill Burr and Jim Gaffigan and Dave Attell, and Jake Johansson is still one of the best comics to ever do it. He's maybe even better than he was in the old days lately. He's really good, and I get to work with him once in a while and at the Comedy and Magic Club in Hermosa. I mean, I could probably name 100 people. There's so many good ones. Sarah Silverman, and
you told me of Gary Goldman, and that was a great.
I'm a fan of. I like. There's so many great comics.
Hello?
Gary Goldman, yes. Gary Goldman is a treasure. He's so good. Jimmy Pardo is a national treasure.
Yeah,
you know that? Is. We're coming in and out. I don't know if that's me or not. Nick Griffin, Mike Kaplan. There's so many great comics, and that's one of the nice things. That's Augie. There you go. Augie is absolutely one of the best comics in America. Augie Smith. If you don't know that name, look up Augie. And Augie's kind of a buddy of mine. He's one of my favorite people when I'm in LA, if I can hang with him. Of course, now he has 3 kids, so he's even harder to get a hold of. But there's great comics. And even comics who are just good, I like. You know what I mean? Like sometimes it's nice to just hang with people that you know and like, and they're doing.
Oops. There we are. Hello.
Yeah, I'm back. Are you back?
I'm here.
Okay.
Let's ask the Peanut Gallery. Hey, Ron, are we back for you? Do we go away? Do we come back? We could do a restart if we need to, but I think we're probably good enough.
I have an All Pro Lines question. Can we get to it?
All right.
We good?
Did you have have your All Pro Lines in mind for a while, or was this just kind of a pandemic thing since we were kind of all at home?
That's a great question. I've been thinking about it for 2 years, and I was afraid to do it because I didn't want to commit to a giant undertaking that might fail. It takes so much work. It's on the other hand, I'm already writing the jokes for Bob and Tom and a few other radio stations, so it overlaps work. And in some ways, the Peanut Gallery has been great. The people have written some really good jokes, and so they help me write jokes, and it's fun to engage with them. That's been the thing that surprised me most about All Pro Lines is not just the quantity of engagement, but the quality. Like, it's really fun to read the comments on All Pro Lines. And if you're not a fan of it yet, come check it out. It's great because I'll write a joke and then there'll be 17 comments and 8 of those are legit funny lines, So yeah, to answer your question, I've been thinking about doing it for a while. And then when the pandemic hit, I thought, well, this is the perfect time to start it, but I don't think there's going to be football. And then when they proved that football was going to be, and it was probably going to stay around for the season in some form, then I was like, fuck it. Let's try it. Let's see what happens. Because I always wanted to do it. I was just afraid. So I just dove in with 2 feet, and we've just been working on it ever since. So here we are.
Costaki, I got a friend.
All right, Rod says we're good.
That's asking a question. I spent years in Chicago and I went to Second City.
Yeah, Augie Gold.
Am I delayed here? Hello?
I don't know if you are.
Yeah, you're delayed, but I'm reading it with you. Do you like improv, and does that require different skill sets than stand-up? Yeah, it's weird how dramatically different that skill set is. I, for one, am not very good at improv. I took an improv class, and I've always tried to have some in the show. I could pull it off because I've spent years working at it. Basically, I use a couple of things I've learned in responding earnestly to what's happening in the room when I need to. But I'm not particularly good at improv per se. And most improvers are not very good at stand-up either. It's a pretty different universe. There are some people who cross over and do both well, of course, Robin Williams being the perfect example. But yeah, there's a little bit of a, there's a little bit of a friendly rivalry and a looking over the fence between stand-ups and improvers, because to improvers, stand-ups are working on something that's contrived and doesn't feel real enough in the moment. And for stand-up comics, we look at improv and we're like, yeah, you guys are real, but there's nothing really gut laugh funny happening here. Like, can you polish it up a little? I'm exaggerating to make the point, but there's always been a rivalry between those two universes. And of course, there's some improv troupes that are astoundingly, fantastically hurt your feelings, hilarious. I like the form of it. And I went to a Groundling show a couple times when I was in LA the last couple of years. My wife and I turned that into a go-to date night. We've been twice in about the 2 years that we were there. So I like it. Good improv is great. Bad improv is maybe the only thing worse than bad stand-up. Bad improv is one of the most painful things in the history of the universe to be a part of. But again, that's my stand-up bias. Bad stand-up is pretty bad too, believe me.
So in writing, how much work goes into writing? What's the process that you follow with that?
Evan. Yeah. Well, appears to be me tonight. Shit. Sorry if you guys can hear me. Sorry about this.
I can hear you.
Hello? Hello?
Yeah.
You got me?
Hello?
Hello?
I got both of you guys. I hate
we're
to
in
be
sync again?
coming in and out for the whole team.
I was asking you about comedy
wonder if it's worth
writing
doing a
and what your
restart.
process is there. Where do you get your inspiration from?
Oh, talk to me. Yeah. Well, plan A is that it just falls out of the sky into your lap, once in a while, the funniest thing that you've ever written is easy and it comes to you very, very easily. But it's very rare and you can't wait that long to do it professionally. So most of comedy writing is hard. You sit and you work and you bang your head against the wall and you write 30 things and 4 of them are pretty good. And you write again and you take those 4 and you write on those again. And it's a lot of work to be good at comedy. I find it to be very challenging, even though I'm pretty good at it. It's still daunting. And I was surprised to discover that some of my biggest writing heroes had the same experience. Larry Miller, among others, was an early writing hero of mine in stand-up. And he was saying that he didn't even like writing, but he did it because he needed to. And it was hard for him to jarring to me. I didn't know that about some of the giants. More problems with the internet. Did you get most of that answer, Ron?
I did. Yeah, you didn't cut out once.
Ron,
do you sometimes write something and then just say, no, that's crossing the line, or that's just going a little too far? Or is that not an issue anymore?
I missed the beginning of that question. Crossing a line in terms of like content?
Right. Right. Do you sometimes write something and then just throw it
No,
away?
it's always
because-
an issue. You always are aware of lines, and you always think about if it's too much. Yeah. Yeah, I do that a lot, actually. In some cases, it's because it's partisan, or it's ridiculously dark, or it's mean spirited, or it's. But it's also fun to be some of those things. So sometimes you can play with it a little bit and see what kind of feels right, and if it's okay to joke around. I recently wrote a bunch of things about allergies, and one of the metaphors that I stumbled onto was using the word retarded. And so I've been trying to decide if I can do that and if it's a good idea, and if I can do it in a way that makes it clear that I agree with the new sort of cultural rule that we probably shouldn't use that word often. So yeah, you're always aware of that stuff and what's okay and how you can do it. I agree with Carlin, who said no topic is off limits. It's how you construct the joke, right? I don't agree with the rule that you can't joke about abortion. I think it's good to keep in mind that abortion is a touchy subject for some of your audience, and what you don't want to do is make people feel bad for things. But you also want to balance that with something that might be creatively very interesting to explore. So I agree with George that everything is on the table, but yes, there are lines, and you kind of are always struggling with where they are and where they should be and where you are in connection with them.
Right.
This may kind of go along with this last question, but have you ever had to adjust your act a little bit due to the nature of the crowd? Like, have you ever gauged the crowd going, maybe I should just change the mood a little bit at all?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, really that's one of the key things about being a professional comedian is you're always doing that. You is a what you hope you have is a large menu of choices, and then you're surfing the moment and doing the show and calling audibles as you go. So let's take a cartoonish example of maybe a first show Saturday. The crowd is a little bit older and a little bit more conservative and not as many drinks, and maybe that's not the show where you pull out the joke that has the R word in it and experiment with them, to take a simple example.
Sure.
And then on the late show, they're totally loosey goosey and willing to play around with something that has some bite and some edge in it. And sometimes, like, even if it's not about bite or edge or politics or corporatism or any of the things that are, or religion, or any of the things that are clearly touchy, sometimes you're just doing a chunk in the space, and it's not singing. And comedy is a very delicate craft, and sometimes it doesn't work very well. So you shift gears and you go to a different chunk, or maybe during check drop they have short attention spans, and instead of doing a big story that has a big payoff at the end, you do a bunch of one-liners until they can all focus again. So part of the job of a comic is to feel out all those things. And, it's very common to have a chunk of stuff that has 20 punchlines in it. And at punchline 4, it ain't working, and you bail on the whole damn thing. Or it works okay and you do 14 lines instead of the 20. You only do the 20 when the whole thing is really singing. So there's always audibles that are being called. And some of them are absolutely because the crowd is touchy or not touchy or rowdy or politically correct, or you're doing a corporate gig or a ship or a college where they're touchy about everything. Or maybe you're just off, or maybe they're off, or there's all these different factors that are happening constantly.
Froze
Froze again. Yep.
You're still there, John, right?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yep. Okay. He's resetting.
Here,
Hello.
Tony says, often a good offensive joke can make people look at what they take too seriously a little differently. Yeah, it can. But it has to be done well. It has to be done by a real artist for that to happen, in my opinion.
Sure. So let's talk about Bob and Tom while we got a few minutes left
All
here.
right.
How did that all evolve?
I lost you guys. If you can hear me, go ahead.
Can hear you.
Hello?
I caught the end of that sentence. Ron, hit me again.
I said, how did the whole Bob and Tom gig evolve? I mean,
Yeah, I got you. Go ahead.
Got me? Hello?
Lost you. I lost you again. I got the basic question. Yeah, I got into Bob and Tom the old-fashioned way, by telling jokes in Indianapolis as a stand-up at the clubs there. And over time, they eventually give a really good middle act a chance to come in and do a few minutes in the 9 o'clock hour. Maybe you come in with the headliner that they already know and love. And I was lucky that I did fairly well, enough that they would happily have me back. And, eventually I grew into a comic that they wanted to have in instead of we're just testing out. And then I grew into a comic that they requested to come in. And eventually I went to the Bahamas with them on their they used to do a big trip every year for the Super Bowl. It was a big thing for their sponsors, and they would bring all these listeners and all these people who were associated with the show. It was like a big thank you to everybody in the Bob and Tom community. They would take them to the Bahamas for the Super Bowl. And when I came back from that, totally by chance, I was working the Indianapolis club again that week. And I felt like I had done all my jokes that I had ever written that were worth a shit on their show.
And
so basically instead of doing jokes for my act, I was a writer for a radio prep service. I was writing topical jokes for this service that would send out to stations in the mornings. I got like 20 of my favorite jokes that I'd written over the last year and a half. And I put together a segment for them called Topical Sounding Jokes. These are jokes that sound like they're from this week, but aren't. And they got a kick out of that. And the stars aligned, and it just killed. They loved it. I would just read them like my best jokes that I wrote over the last year and a half. Stuff that was a little bit evergreen, like Pac-Man turned 35 years old this week. That's a long time to be chased by little demons. Just ask Robert Downey Jr. It was like that. And they would get the rim shot machine out, and they would come back from an ad and go, yeah, you got any more of those topical sounding jokes? And it just killed. And afterwards, Tom grabbed me and goes, you think you could do that every week? And I go, yes, I can. And I knew immediately that I could not, but I wasn't going to tell him that. And so they were nice to me. They let me kind of play around and figure out what it was.
When was that?
It was cool. We actually spent the next several weeks. That was about 13 years ago.
Wow.
And I've been on more weeks than not ever since, Sometimes it's every week, sometimes every other week. There were a couple of stretches where I wasn't on, but yeah, they've been great to me.
And you did the Econo monologue, and then it transitioned into the NFL report.
That's right. I was doing the Econo monologue, which was basically just a writing exercise. I did anything that had bullet points, like phobias and Christmas traditions from around the world, anything that I thought I could grab some subjects and write jokes on. One time I did Dante's Inferno. I was like, well, there's 9 circles of hell. I should be able to write 9 jokes at least. And then I developed an all NFL version of the Econo monologue to try to pitch to sports radio. And while I was pitching at sports radio and failing at that, I was doing it on Bob and Tom, and they loved it. And so it's the Economonologue sort of became an all NFL Economonologue. This is essentially what happened. And they've been great.
Is that the only call in you do?
Tony said had to drive my kids to school during Bob and Tom. My son's yeah. And now we're in the off season. I talked to Tom a couple of weeks ago, and I'm going to keep doing it on Tuesdays. And if there's football news, I'll cover that. And if there's not, then I'm going to do Economonologues. And this morning, actually, I did a bunch of football jokes, and I was easing into an allergy Economonologue. And I'll probably end up doing a bunch of allergy jokes next week, unless Deshaun Watson gets traded. So we'll see what happens. Oh man, what a mess! I can't hear you guys. Ron, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Riggsy?
We're just
Yep,
out of
I hear you.
sync, I think.
Oh. Well, apologies to the viewers. Not nailing it with the technical side.
Quick
Go ahead,
question.
Riggs. I can hear you a little bit.
Okay. Have you ever had a Josh Arnold Toledo, Ohio moment where you just bombed for 4 days in a row?
Goodness. I have so many bomb stories, but I don't know if I did 4 in a row anywhere. I've got hundreds of eating it stories. Actually, when I worked with Bill Burr somewhat recently, Bill Burr came to close down the old Atlanta Punchline, and they had me booked a headline that night when they got Bill. So sort of as a nod to me, they
We have to fill in the words here, John.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, he's frozen.
Costaki, can you hear us? You are frozen again.
restart.
Oh,
There he is.
there he is.
Yeah, sorry, boys. It's pretty late in the game to try to do a restart, so let's just muddle through. Yeah, I've eaten it so many times, Riggsy, of course. I was saying they put me in the middle spot when Bill Burr came to close down the Punchline, and his crowd is very specific to him, and they didn't know I was on the bill. And I definitely had 2 sets of not doing particularly well in front of Bill Burr, which hurt my feelings because that's a club that I normally kill in. And, you know, there's all kinds of weird things that happen that aren't your fault, that, you know, just the show is just a disaster. Usually it's a bad setup for a corporate gig or someplace that's not used to doing comedy, or a bachelorette party, or you're hungover, or you're sick, or you're just not feeling it. I mean, there's so many things that go wrong in comedy, especially in the early days when you're not performing in good venues, you know. One that still haunts me to this day, when I first started doing it professionally, I had a gig in Jasper, Alabama, and they moved the stage of the comedy show because there was a dart tournament, which that's never good when you're second banana to the dart tournament in a small Alabama town. They literally moved the comics to a stage that overlooked a dance floor with no tables and chairs, and there was no one seated there. And there were people, maybe 6 or 10 people on the sides of the dance floor, kind of paying attention. And invariably, I would get to a punchline and something would happen in the dart tournament and they would all cheer. And the handful of people who were kind of watching me would stop and look to see what was happening. I literally cried into my pillow that night. And I go, what am I doing with my life? So when you're a comic, there's always that. You always have that, always exists. That's around any corner. In fact, I'm heartened to tell you this next story. I went to see George Carlin at Vegas at Bally's one time, and he ate it. They hated his guts. He closed on like a 15-minute rant about how there's no God, and they hated him so much. It was kind of fun to watch. So you never know. Sometimes it's your fault. Sometimes it's a bad situation, but a bad show is around any corner all the time.
But we also talked, Costaki, one time about Josh not really bombing in Toledo.
Let's do maybe one more question and call it a night. We got so many technical glitches here. I apologize to everybody involved. Goodness gracious.
Sorry.
Tell them about bombing where. You got to be more specific. I only heard parts of that.
No, I said in Toledo. You said something about the room.
I lost you again, Ron. Tell them about bombing where?
In Toledo. You said the design of the room had something possibly to do with it too.
In Toledo. Oh, you've seen me in Toledo many times. It's weird because I don't want to be rude about that club because the club has some of the best trappings in all of comedy. The staff is awesome. The managers and the waitresses are great. The food is fantastic. It's one of the few comedy clubs that has great food. The hotel is awesome, and across the street, you can look out your hotel window and see the club, which I love. The people of Toledo are great. But there's something about that room that's just, it's hard to kill in there. And I think it's that the ceiling is too high. I think it's that they give away some of the.
Giving away something.
In 57.
There he is.
I think we got to call it a night, boys. This is getting crazy. This is like, this reminds me of in the early days of the Iraq War. There would be some journalists huddled in a Hilton in Baghdad somewhere, and you could see them come in and out. I apologize to you two, especially, and also to the viewers. You guys are great. I cannot thank you enough for your support. You two guys in particular have been beacons of support in all of the ways. I thank you guys. I thank you for doing this weird self-indulgent experiment as well. And we'll talk again, hopefully in better technical environments. You boys are the best. Thank you very much for doing it. Come back next week. We'll work out the technical bugs and we'll talk to an old radio friend of mine, also known as Uncle Nasty. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take it easy. We'll see you next time.
See ya.